Hey, everybody. Welcome to Central Texas Football Podcast. I'm Kenny Heath coming to you from our worldwide headquarters in Huron, Texas. And once again this week, we have Terry Bennett joining us. Terry, how you doing, buddy?
I'm doing great. I have to change my name because my name is not S2S Week 2, but we just got through recording last night our Sideline to Sideline show. So I'm doing great, man. It's Wednesday. You know how it is in football season. Wednesday is basically Friday because there's football tomorrow each and every week for the rest of the year.
Yep, that's awesome. And we got a couple of good matchups in Central Texas. Tell us about last week. I think you were at Leonard Jefferson. And did you go to the Carthage game? Were y'all at Carthage?
Yeah, we went and saw Carthage and Kilgore. And I'm going to tell you what, wow. Kilgore's the real deal, folks, in 4A Division One. I know a lot of people have hooked into Stephenville, and look what Stephenville did against Midlothian Heritage. They dominated a really good 5A team, but man, Kilgore's defense dominated a Carthage team that had not lost at home in 8 years. And, it was, the score was 20-15. I know Carthage took a lead late in the game, but that game, Kilgore could have easily won that game by 3 touchdowns if Carthage's defense wasn't as or almost as good. So it was a great way to start our football watching.
Good. Sounds fun. I planned on going to China Spring, Franklin, but I got outvoted. Took my daughter to West Fest for the carnival ride and all that good stuff. So we had a good time. So, hey, let's get started with our Matt Stepp question of the week. So here's our question. Thank you, Matt Stepp, for once again joining us this year. Question of the week. We had several cross classification matchups in the Super Centex region. As the dust settled on week one, which final score intrigued you the most and why? And Terry, I'll let you answer it first. Which one kind of piqued your interest, or you kind of saw it on your phone and your eyes kind of raised up a little bit?
I mean, this one's easy. Whitney, not beating Mart, but beating Mart the way they beat Mart to me is just very impressive. I didn't have that. I had them winning, and I even had them winning by 14 points. But to come out and beat them, 42-8. I still think that speaks more for Whitney than any kind of knock on Mart. And so, yeah, that one for me.
Yeah, I think, of course, Tay Johnson, John Tay Johnson had a great game, 250 yards. But I think what is really impressive about that for Whitney is the way the defense played. Only giving up 8 points to Mart. I think their defense is way ahead of where they thought it was going to be. Man, I really like the Troy Salado game. Now, I know Salado's not a 4A banger. They've been decent here in the past, but I like the way Troy won. McMurtry didn't have to throw for 450 yards, and they had a running back that did really well that got some yards. So I think Troy, now they're not on Franklin level, but I think they might be competing for that number 2 spot there in that district with the Little River Academy, who took that loss to Connelly.
Yeah, it's so funny to be thinking about now. Troy's trying to find more consistent running games so they don't have to throw the ball so much, because when Troy kind of came on the scene 5 years ago, they were running that, power set, kind of a little bit of a wing tee that they would flip to a flex, and then they would, also get in that slot. And so it's kind of weird how with Coach Brashear there, they're flipped. And if they can find consistent running game, I agree, especially, and I know Little River's got beat by Connelly, and Connelly's bigger than them and faster. But yeah, I do think at least Troy put on notice that they're going to be competitive for that last playoff spot, or at least third playoff spot.
Yeah, and I got last year their first game of the season. They played at Whitney, so I got a first-hand look at that pass-catch combo they had there with Ketchum and McMurtry, and they're impressive. And they just got better as the season went on. So now that you have the Jaden Lucky with 28 carries and 188 yards against Salado, that's just going to make that offense that much better, you would imagine. So I look for pretty good things from Troy this week. I don't know who they got next week. Oh, they got Hillsboro. So that'll be another kind of a little litmus test for them. Let's look at Matt Stepp's answer. He liked the Waco Connelly win over Little River Academy. It caught his eye. He had some questions about Connelly because of the new faces, and they went out and convincingly took care of a really good B squad. So let's start there on our review. What was your thoughts on that Connelly Little River Academy game?
I'm a little bit surprised by the score. I'm not surprised that Connelly beat them. I mean, again, Connelly's the fastest team the Little River is going to see, and that's including Franklin and the likes of those. Connelly, if they were able to play down in 3A, they would win a ton of games. At 4A, they're always a tough beat, but they never can consistently get that big win, or whenever they get that big win. And you and I were talking before we started recording, kind of joking about our college football fandom. We were talking about Texas Tech. Even when Texas Tech gets that big win, what happens the next 2 weeks usually turns against them. That's kind of where the Cadets have been. A few years ago, I think they won 12 games, but they're consistently 8-4, 9-3, 6-3, 6-5. And it feels like they leave 2 or 3 wins on the table. So I'm not really. I'm a little bit surprised by the score, but I mean, we'll see this week. Connelly, they're taking on Laga Vista. We have a Laga Vista coaching show on the network. Coach Creighton Phillips, and the Vikings are a really good defensive, sound 4A Division II team. Let's see what the Cadets do against them, and then we can start going. Okay, maybe they are the real deal. But they do have a really tough non-con or non-district. They got Grandview and then Alvarado before they hit district.
Yeah, and if you look at the stat lines of Jamari Vincent, 3 for 7 for 84 yards, rushed for 140 yards and 3 touchdowns. Really, kid's a stud athlete. I think they kind of rested him and let the sophomore C.J. Evans come in, and he pitched the ball around a little bit. Looks like they found their running back for the year, Braden Ford, 14 for 148 yards and 1 touchdown. And we talked about it before we started recording. I looked at the Little River Academy stat line, and Brody Allen, their new quarterback, was 10 for 16, 97 yards and 2 touchdowns. And you look at the rushing stats, and it kind of slipped by me, but there was no Cavalli Neely.
Yeah.
And I text our buddy down at the Tim Bell Sports, Greg Willie, and he's like, no, he's at Temple now. So that kind of slipped past me, but I think that's a big hit for Little River.
I think that's a massive hit, especially when you're trying to break in a new quarterback. You've got a pretty salty offensive line still there. I was real big on them, saying, hey, look, this team ain't going anywhere. They're going to be back next year. Now they've got to find a running back. And again, I don't know if we got a true test or a true view of what they're going to be able to do with who they played in Connelly. They do that yo-yo where they go from one of the top teams in 4A to now they're dropping down to one of the best teams in 2A, and they still might lose. And you still are not going to get to really know anything about them because Lexington is really good this year. If Lexington stays healthy, and that's been the Eagles' big issue the last couple of years, if they stay healthy, they might run away with a really good region.
Yeah, I agree. We're going to preview that game coming up. Let's go to Franklin and China Spring. Kind of a sloppy game. I think Jaden Jackson kind of left early in the first half, came back in the second half. He might be a little banged up. Battles is still kind of got a learning curve at quarterback. I think he did well. But, I kind of really, with China Spring having to replace the kids they had to replace, probably not a big surprise here.
No, and it's funny how China Spring and Lorena both are kind of taking steps back this year. I think they're still going to be really competitive, and I think both of those teams are still teams that, especially if they're in the second or third spot, you don't want to see in the playoffs. But it's going to take some games, and this is one of those where you wonder, okay, is it sometimes better not to have that murderer's row schedule? Like, you talk to coaches and you have some coaches like, yeah, we play tough everybody tough, or we always play, weaker teams. We want to be undefeated. And then you get the coaches that say, well, I have to look at my team and decide. And I just wonder, man, it feels like both of them, there's a real good chance China Spring and Lorena both have losing records going into their district play.
Yeah. And very real. And I think with a 3A team, we're going to talk about here in a little bit, I think they could be 500 or losing. Let's go to Robinson West. That was a triple overtime game. I think West scored 14 points really late, maybe 2 minutes left in the game to tie it up. Bryce McCurdy for Robinson, he's slinging the ball around. I think they found their senior Stephen Knight for Robinson, 3 touchdowns. And at West, they kind of rotated quarterbacks between Dub Crane and Ledger Nardell. Probably you could expect that going in. Surely by district, they'll probably figure out who they want to start quarterback for them. You think?
Oh, I mean, unless that's what they want to do. And speaking of, just to go back, I do know, and I don't know how how true this is, but I do know Connelly was looking at maybe running some dual quarterback stuff this year to get Jamarian out of center and to do other things on the field, because when he goes to college, it won't be as a quarterback, and that's not a knock. He'll be a secondary guy, and he'll probably be a special teams guy. And so, there are more and more teams that are willing to do that. I'm still a big fan of, if you got two good quarterbacks, you've got no good quarterbacks, because you just end up taking away. But man, I want to point to Robinson, because you talked about them last week, and I was like, okay, sure, Robinson. And then I kind of started peeling back and looking at some of the stuff and how many they had coming back. And then I got my hands on a couple scrimmage highlights, and those are really they're scrimmages anyway. But when you only see highlights, but I was impressed with what I saw. And I'm not saying West is some 3A power, but West is a team that's usually, when you play them, they're physical.
Yeah, they're solid. Always solid.
And especially now that they're throwing the ball more, I legitimately think for the Rockets, this is that springboard type of win. You've got Caldwell this week. You should beat them. I almost name your score. Then you've got Alvarado and Glenrose. If they can be 2-2 after those 4 games, I think Robinson has some good things going on this year in a district where we talked about China Spring and Lorena. Both looks like they've taken a little bit of a step back.
Yeah, and that goes kind of to our question that we had last week, the 2 truths and a lie. Yeah. Can Robinson or Gatesville slide into that number 4 spot? And I think one of them can. Gatesville had a good win last week. So that'll be interesting to watch. I think Robinson, their defense was pretty good. Holding West to 7 points there for almost the entire game, kind of stifling that offense. So that'll be, I'm Coach Lancaster over there is doing a good job. We'll go to Whitney Mart real quick. We talked about it. Still, I kind of lean towards that danged if you do, danged if you don't deal with that. And we talked with Coach Haynes about it on his show. You go into Mart, they've got trophies everywhere. They put you in a locker room with all their trophies. It's kind of intimidating. And I think the Wildcats went out there. They ran the ball well. They ran the ball a lot. They didn't throw the ball as much as they have in the past. And I think the key, they're young, getting those young kids experience, and the defense played really well.
I mean, again, I thought Whitney would win, but I thought it would be one of those where they win, 35-21, where they just kind of wear down Mart in that second half with depth. And for them to go out and just, dominate. They dominated Mart. There's no other way around that. And it doesn't mean anything until, again, what do they do going forward? But just like we talk about with Robinson, there are certain starts to the season that can really propel you to bigger things. And I think that this could be what that is for Whitney.
All right, let's go Lexington Marlin. Lexington's got, the good quarterback, Case Evans. He had an okay game, through for 175 yards. What surprised me is on Marlin's side, they got a veteran quarterback in Roderick Suiters over there. He threw 2 pick sixes, had a kind of a rough night. And the highlight was, the big stud they got, Bryson Maxwell Steele. That guy went off, 15 tackles, 2 forced fumbles, a fumble recovery for a touchdown, a sack, 5 tackles for losses. So their defense, I think Marlin's defense, probably where it needs to be. But Lexington, man, a good ball club, just getting a win, any way they can.
Well, and you got to remember especially the first week of the year, you will sometimes, and more, not sometimes, a lot of times, you're going to get completely different things than you've seen on film, because teams are game planning against you longer than what everybody says. I know all coaches will say, "Oh, we're taking week 1." No, you're not. You're watching film in July, and you're trying to break, do different things and stuff. And so I'm not ready to be worried about Marlin now. And saying that, Marlins, they start the season on the road. Like, if the schedule that I'm looking at is correctly, they start 4 straight games on the road. They're going to Honeygrove. And look, Honeygrove's defense, folks, I know that they struggle at times with athletic teams, and this is why this is such an interesting game. And we talked about it on Sideline to Sideline. But, man, if Marlin is going to win this game, they're going to have to at least score 14 points. And not many teams score 14 points on this Honeygrove Warriors defense.
Yeah, that'll be interesting. I didn't even think about looking who they had next week. I think Marlin will be okay in that district. Crawford, they got beat by Hampshire Fenton. Is it? No, Shiro. Shiro last week. And
Crawford's down. Like, Crawford is, sometimes it takes a couple years for you to see that. And, they just off was 12-2 or something like that 2 years ago, and then last year they were 6-5. And you go, okay, hey, they're 6-5, they'll be fine. But the way they've started off this season, it's obvious they're having to figure things out. And again, I feel like we're saying about this every team. They turn around and they play Centerville this week. That's not going to be any easy task for Crawford. But yeah, I think Marlin's going to be fine. But I think the issue that they're going to have to figure out is when you play good teams, you can't overcome the mistakes. And sometimes Marlin can overcome the mistakes with the athletes they have. You're not going to do that against the good teams. And they learned that really quick against Lexington.
Let's roll over to Glenrose Grandview. I don't think really surprised about that score. We know Glenrose is really good. I think Grandview is going to be down from where we've seen them the last couple of weeks. Case Evans, the quarterback at Glenrose, 329, 5 touchdowns. Their wide receiver, I don't know how to say his name, Josiah. Sounds like Greenweg or Groenweg. He had 104 yards and a touchdown. Grandview still kind of don't know a whole lot about them. They don't put a whole lot of stuff on Max Preps. The Cleveland newspaper doesn't really cover them that well. I know they've got a good look. The Dominguez kid is pretty good, and the quarterback's a new kid or a new quarterback to the team. So that Grandview's another team that they may have a losing record going into district. They may end up 5-5.
Oh yeah, I mean Eagle Mountain. Now they'll beat Eagle Mountain this week, but then they've got Colony and Waco Connelly, and then they've got their annual Malakoff game, and then they've got a Spring Hill game, the last game of district. If they don't pay attention, Spring Hill is very athletic this year. They have one of the better running backs in 3A. Spring Hill doesn't have a lot of depth, but if you're banged up and you're sitting at 1-3, which they will be, I don't think they beat Connelly, and I definitely don't think they beat Malakoff, and you're looking at Whitney to start district. That Spring Hill game could be that perfect trap game where they get caught and they go into district sitting at 1-4 because they'll beat Eagle Mountain. They could maybe play with Connelly, but look, I know normally when they play Malakoff, the joke that we have on sideline to sideline, and you can literally go look it up. It feels like that game always ends up 21-14 or 21-17. Mm-hmm. It ain't going to this year. Yeah. Malakoff is just. I mean, we had a whole discussion last night on if Lorena can even stay on the field with Malakoff. And Lorena's down, don't get me wrong, but it's still friggin' Lorena. Yeah. You would think that they would, and I'm trying to defend Lorena, and the more I'm thinking about it, I'm like, dude, with Mike Jones at quarterback and everybody back, I mean, Malakoff is kind of where Franklin was a couple years ago after Franklin finally won their first state championship. They did it with a group that was young. That's what Malakoff has done. And Malakoff is not going anywhere. And I'm like you, and more people have said, I think Grandview might be down a little bit more than people realize.
They still stay in the top 10. I think the magazine has. How much do you pay attention to the rankings?
None. And that's not a knock on Dave Campbell. I don't pay attention to any rankings. We do rankings after week 5, and I don't pay attention to them until I do them. I help Grant put them together, and I don't pay attention to them just because if you're ranking a whole class, that's really hard because you've got 2 divisions. If you're ranking a division, that's really watered down after 5. Like top 5, and that's what we do. We go top 5. We don't go below, because when you're only talking, 16 districts, after 5, you're getting into some teams that will be like 4-2 and 4-3, and they haven't played the top teams, but they're still they would beat most of the people under them. So I look at them, but I don't really pay attention to them.
All right, and we kind of touched on this. Troy Salado. I think it's good that Troy found a little running game against Salado. They just still gave up a lot of points. Salado's got a kid in Lincoln Hussfield that can sling the ball, 400 yards and 4 touchdowns against Troy. So they may have a little defensive issue to shore up over there, but a good victory for Troy.
Yeah, and Salado, they had what's his name as the head coach there for a couple of years, and everybody thought
Westerberg.
Yeah, and everybody thought, hey man, because in 2020 they were like 11-2, and then Westerberg took over, and nothing against him, but you could tell he was coaching the twilight of his coaching career. Yeah. Now, in saying that, we went out and saw them 2 years ago against Hitchcock. We all know how Hitchcock has gotten to 3A, and they literally had Hitchcock beat in a game where Hitchcock dominated all game long and then kind of spit the bit at the end. But then Salado, kind of fitting of how their last 2 years went, they're literally going in to drive to finish the game. All they need is a first down. Quarterback, big old kid, I can't remember his name. He rolls out. He's got the first down, and he trips over his own feet, and the ball pops out. Hitchcock scoops and scores, and they end up winning. Yeah, and you know how that is when programs, man. When you start losing that way, it is really hard to get out of there. It's weird how good luck is attached to good teams and bad luck to bad teams, and so. But yeah, anyway, back to Troy. Like we talked about earlier, I like the fact that they have a little bit more diversity in their offense. They cannot throw as much as they did last year in the district they're in and expect him to survive.
Yeah. All right, let's look at the couple of games coming up. What's your thoughts on Salina and La Vega? You think La Vega has enough to keep up with them?
Yeah, I definitely think they have enough to keep up with them. I like La Vega at home in this game. Look, Belleville is really good this year, and Belleville at the end of the year is going to be damn good. But Belleville's replacing a lot that they've got to work through early. In the old days, Belleville would have played a crappy team down there and won by 40, and they wouldn't even think about it anymore. I think for Belleville, this works. Salina, big offensive line, great running game. They've kind of gone a little bit back to the old Salina. They still throw the ball and they still run the spread, but they're going to run that, off tackle, and they're going to run that inside trap, and they're going to pull their guards, and their defense is physical, and their defense is sound. I don't know if their defense is athletic enough against La Vega. And La Vega's breaking in a new quarterback, but they still got that great running back. And it still feels weird to talk about La Vega and talk about their offense before we even talk about their defense. I like La Vega at home, but I think it's going to be like a 42-40 type of football game.
Yeah, I think that's a good point. We're talking about their offense. They got the athlete and Thornton that, can run the ball, catch the ball. They are breaking in a new quarterback. Bryson Rowland has been running the ball on varsity since he's a freshman, which seems like forever ago. The kids, I think he's approaching 6,000 yards total. That'll be a good one. Man, hopefully La Vega can pull that out. That'll be a good win for Coach Don Hyde and his guys.
And either way, though, it's a great test. And you speaking of test again, I love, especially in this Central Texas area, a lot of it's because you go across the region so quick. But they've got Salina this week, then they've got West Orange Stark, who I was surprised that they beat Newton as bad as they did. Not that they beat Newton, but they beat them 32-8. I don't think they've scored legitimately. I don't think West Orange Stark had scored 30 points in their last 4 combined games against ranked opponents. So that I was impressed with that. Then La Vega has Brownwood, and I like that they kept Stephenville on the schedule. Waco, La Vega is one of those teams that, dude, they could legitimately easily be 1-4 and still run through that district with no problem.
Yeah, I think they're the district favorite. Yeah, and that is a tough schedule. And we look at teams that do. Grandview does it. They schedule that rough pre-district schedule. You think it just makes, if they can stay healthy, they're just going to be better for it for facing those teams.
Well, yeah, good teams, you learn from those games, whether you win or lose. Just like the Kilgore-Carthage game, and that's a long-time rivalry. They've been in the same district multiple times. They played in a state championship game against each other 13 or 12 years ago. But that game felt like a playoff game in week 1. That game, those boys on both sides, especially the guys who were maybe taking their first varsity snaps, they now know what it's like to be in that type of game. And when they get in that type of game again later on in the season, it'll be easier to recall and know how to react and know the speed of it. And so I'm a huge believer in, if you have a good team and you're healthy, you try to play the toughest schedule you can. Now, again, sometimes that hurts. Like say Lexington, it feels like every year Lexington has lost somebody over the last 4 years. But I still think at the end of the day, it usually makes you better.
Well, let's roll into Koff Lorena. Probably not the luster that this game had on it last year. They played in the semifinals, regional finals last year.
It was. Franklin, Lorena lost to Franklin in the region final last year.
Oh, yeah, that's right. There were 2 different regions.
Because that was
region 3. My bad.
Yeah, because Lorena beat Columbus. It was so funny because Columbus was the hot team, and then Lorena beat them, and so you transferred that to Lorena, and then Franklin just reminded everybody that, hey guys, we're Franklin.
we're still here.
Lorena, we're going to beat them pretty badly. But yeah, this game's lost its luster. Lorena is down. this year, and they're still going to be good inside, their district. I still don't think that Malakoff blows the doors off of them. Grant does. I think it's still really tough to go play in Lorena, and I know Malakoff has played in all the tough places, and I think Lorena has a lot of pride, and they're up in 4A for the first time in 2 cycles. They don't want to get beat by the 3A defending state champ. That they don't want that to happen. So I think this game is still going to be closer, but I do like Malakoff winning the game. There's Mike Jones at quarterback, man. He has hit that rarefied special air of like Jack Dallas at West Orange Stark in the early 2000s or 2010s. Kyler Murray and what he did at Allen, where he never lost. And Mike Jones, he's reached that, and he's only a sophomore.
I think he's junior.
Or junior, yeah, because last year's sophomore. So, I mean, Malakoff is just loaded for bear right now.
Well, and you look at Lorena, man, they've got new guys. The Smedhammer kids, one's at quarterback, one's at running back. They're both starting for the first time. They do have the Corrales kid, who's a really good athlete. They've got a tall target on the outside and the Blanchette kid, but they're trying to put everything together. And then you look at Koff, like you said, with Mike Jones and then Jason Tennyson and Darian Hall, a 1-2 punch at running back. And I'm sure they've got athletes all over the field to play receiver. Yeah, I just think Koff's just going to be too much for him.
Well, and, Lorena right now, they're one of those teams, I think they have a lot of talent, but they're still trying to put it all together. Like it's, football, when you build your offense and your defense, it's a puzzle. It's not. People will say, well, it's your best 11. No, it's the best 11 guys that played the best together. And I think Lorena is going to have to figure that out. And just by where they're at as a program, Malakoff has a bunch of juniors that have all been playing together, and they figured it out over the last 2 years. And we're seeing that now.
Yeah, and I think it's going to be fun watching up front. Lorena's got the big kid that's got a few off. I think it's Blackwell. They're always big up front. They're gonna have size, and then seeing how that running game and Mike Jones, he's going to run the ball a lot, and see how they can pound on that front of Lorena will be interesting.
Yeah, and again, even if Lorena's taking a step back, they're going to be physical, and they're going to present a lot more challenges to Malakoff than West Crest did.
All right, let's roll over to the Lexington Eagles against the Little River Academy Bumblebees. Kind of threw this one in here because I think it's a good cross-classification matchup. See how Lexington can do. I think this may tell you more about Lexington than Little River, which I'm sure Little River, they want to get that dub here pretty quick just to get some confidence and momentum going. A little different type of opponent, probably not as athletic as Connelly, but Lexington is a top 10 3A D2 school, so it's going to be a tough battle for them.
I would 100% agree with you if Little River Academy had lost to Connelly by 10 points, even 14, or you could say, okay, this is more of a test for Lexington. But I kind of feel like for LRA, especially, losing your stud back, and I know they lost him before the season, but you're still trying to find the guy to replace him after you already lost your stud quarterback who had kind of helped put the program on the map. I kind of feel like this is almost as more of an important game for Little River Academy now. I think they don't want to go 0-2 against two quality opponents, but still, I kind of feel like Lexington kind of showed last week with Marlin. Again, Marlin's athletic. Marlin will score a lot of points, hold them to 12. They've got Rockdale and Groesbeck coming up. And so I think Lexington wins. And I think if Little River Academy might be facing some issues at 0-2 that we didn't maybe think they would.
Yeah, I think I agree with you. I think Lexington probably gets their offense a little bit more wide open this week. Marlin's pretty athletic. They can, we talked about the big guy they got up front. I think Case Evans probably goes off. And I think maybe Little River kind of keeps it close for a while. But I like Lexington to get this one too.
Yeah.
I threw this one in. Let's go Maypearl and Mart. Let's see if does Mart bounce back. Maypearl's coach Marty Amaran, he's kind of, they're a tougher team. The kids don't quit over there. They haven't been real successful here lately. They've got a good little running back over there. What's your thoughts on this one?
Maypearl had kind of become a joke. Not like they weren't bad enough that they were a joke of a program, but they were the butt of jokes. And you kind of said it when your coach acknowledges that, hey, we've got to get this program tougher. That's just where they were. I think it was 2017 or 2018. They were winless, and then they won 3, and then they had a playoff, made the playoffs a few years ago, and then they had 2 bad years, and then last year they kind of bounced back with a 7-4 season. They returned 17 starters, and they've got some pretty decent athleticism. I like their running back JT Washington. I think they have a solid offensive line. They're not real big. But at the end of the day, man, it's still Mart, and I think Mart's going to be angry. Now, I will say this: if Mart struggles in this game, and I know they're both 3A teams, and especially Maypearl being a Division I team, but still, if Mart struggles in this game, then you got to start asking, is there something wrong in the Panthers that might be a season long issue? I think they actually win this game comfortably, though.
I do too, and that's just when you're saying if they lose here, you got to question them. That's just where Mart's at. They're a 2A D2 school, and if they lose to 2-3A D1s, you're like, hey, what's going on over there at Mart? That's not normal throughout the state, but that's just what kind of program that Coach Hoffman has over there. I think Medlock, he goes off. They're probably pissed off right now. A lot of people that I talked to, I wasn't there, just not a whole lot of enthusiasm out there on the field, and I think Coach Hoffman kind of acknowledged that after the game. He told a Waco Trib reporter, hey, I told you we weren't good. I told you we were going to lose. That's just you shouldn't even have come, according to him.
Well, and you got to understand, dude, this is a Mart team that lives at the state semifinals to state championships. Even though they haven't won one, it's crazy to say it like this is something. They haven't won state in almost 5 years. Oh no. Yeah. They've been to, back-to-back state championship games and lost. They got beaten 2 semifinals. So there's got to be a little boredom in September. We all want to think, because we love football, that every kid that plays football is going out in that first game going, yay. Now, some of them are like, hey, I'm ready for December. I want to win state. And they've got to work through that process. And so you're right. But here's the thing. Mart's been playing these type of schedules for years, and usually they're dominating those teams. Usually they're beating Whitney 32-7, not losing 42-8. And so that when it doesn't happen, it makes you pause again for Mart at Mart's level. I still think Mart's at least going to the state semifinals, and that's in a tough district. Mm-hmm. Let's not forget, and I said this on the 2A preview show, I think Mart wins district, but I still think, and I even think I said it last week when we were talking about the question of the week, I still think Mart wins district, but it would not shock me if Mart is not unscathed in district. Yeah, Bremont and Chilton and that group, it's going to be a battle that they've not had in a long time in October. They usually don't have to play real hard in October. Now they do.
Yeah, that'll tell a lot, and I'll keep an eye on that one. Let's go. So kind of threw this one in too because of Troy and the way Hillsboro beat McGregor, which is a 3A D1 school. So, and they haven't made the playoffs in a while, but I saw some game film on that. Moses Rangel, quarterback for Hillsboro, looks really good. Looks more accurate than he has in the past. They've got some speed over there at Hillsboro. Now, Grandview, I believe McGregor did lose their starting quarterback the second drive of the game. McGregor just doesn't have a whole lot of team speed. No. They didn't get Torres the ball hardly at all. He didn't really run. Maybe they were in they were trying to catch up mode. I'm interested in this Hillsboro team. Man, they've been and Coach Al Mute is a buddy of the show. We've had him on. They just look like they're one of those teams that they've got they look the look. They just don't. It doesn't convert to wins.
Well, and you look at them last year, 5-6, and they lose by 1 to Whitney. They lose by 20 to Little Rivers Academy. They get shut out by Robinson, but it's 21-0. And in today's football world, a 3-touchdown game is not a oh my god.
Yeah.
They're in district, and they're in a competitive district last year where basically, hey, you're going to lose to Glenrose, and but if you beat everybody else, you should be fine. And they got into the playoffs, but they got beat by Godley, and it kicked their seeding, and they had to play Graham in the first round. For a program like Hillsboro, they've either got to pull the shocking upset off in the first round, or they've got to win the games they need to win in district. So they're not the fourth place team going in. They're the third or second, and they're sitting in a district again this year where, you've got Dunbar, who's going to be interesting. Of course, Glenrose is Glenrose, but everybody else, Benbrook, Godley, and Venus, Hillsboro should be like, we should beat those three. Beat those three, and then just beat Dunbar, and you're sitting at number 2 in district, and all of a sudden your playoff life looks way different.
Yeah, and I think they've got a row of 3A. I think they play Whitney. Do they play Little River again, maybe? So they got got
Whitney and West and Robinson. So that's they beat McGregor. They got Troy this week. They're on the road at Whitney. Then they host West, and then they go to Robinson, and the great thing about their district play is they start their district with Venus. You should win that. Glenrose, you're going to lose that. But then it's Benbrook, Dunbar, and Godley. Go 2-1 and you're in third place. Go 3-0 and you possibly can against those groups. You're sitting at number 2 in district. And again, I'm telling you, coaches always joke about, man, the difference between fourth and second place in a lot of these regions where your playoff path is just mind blowing. And then all of a sudden you get a win in the playoffs, and then boom, next thing you know, you're actually, because I'm like you, it feels like Hillsboro should be better every year, and they're never terrible. They're just never good. They're just always 6-5.
Well, they've got a new turf over there. They've been at the same place. I like where their field's at. It's over there at the fairgrounds. They got new turf. They got a new entrance. Like we said, they've always looks like they look the part, and I think we're going to know a lot of, like you just named out their district schedule. There's a lot of quality teams on that in that Robinson game. So going into district, they ought to be prepared. So we'll know probably a little bit more about them when district starts.
I didn't even look at their records, but for the last 5 years, we called them a 6-5 team. I was wrong. They're like a 5.5 and 5.5 team, because this is since 2018, 5-6, 4-7, 4-6, 6-5, 5-6, and 5-6. You're talking 2 different wins in district, and you might be talking 2 more rounds into the playoffs, and that changes the program. 5-6 becomes even 9-3. All of a sudden you have a little bit different pep in your step. People are wanting to move to your town more because their kid, they feel, hey, our starting linebacker, we're moving to Central Texas. He could be the difference between y'all going 9-3 to 10-2 and stuff like that. So I always want programs like this to finally get that big win that propels them into a couple round run, because it's fun when a new town goes 2 or 3 rounds, and they haven't done that in a long time.
And I think that is a valid point. They do lose kids. They lose kids to West. They lose kids to Whitney. Hubbard, maybe not Hubbard, but the surrounding areas. And
Hubbard.
When you start winning, those kids, they kind of stay close to home, I think.
Yeah, they'll stay close, and you'll get more. I mean, we this. Central Texas is one of the hottest population explosions in the world, not the state, not the country, in the world. And you don't think, and this is the whole thing, a couple of weeks ago, the UIL did their whole thing about transfers. And I know they want to stop it, like charter schools and things like that. But you're in a world where these parents are going to take their kids where they want to take them. And if you present yourself as an attractive town with good jobs and a good football/sports program, you'd be surprised at how many D1 kids will end up at a school like Hillsboro.
Yeah, and I think they've done studies that if you're really successful in athletics, your test scores are probably up there too. A town like a Grandview or whatever that's won some state titles, their test scores are pretty good. So we've talked about that, as part of a different community here about I think a good athletic program is really valuable on many levels to a school like that. Small school.
I mean, unless you have something else that's really, really a good avenue for kids, and some schools do, and some schools do both. Like I was just telling Grant, we go to Carthage. I went to a junior college in Carthage, Panola Junior College, and Panola has a baseball program. They had football, they got rid of it. They have a basketball program, and then they have a theater department, and their theater department is very well known. Well, Carthage High School, they support, obviously they support their football program. Look how good it is, but they also support their theater arts, and they also support everything else. But it all started because the sports program was good. And that you'd be surprised, and living in a small town, dude, the attitude of a town on a Monday after a big win in football is completely different.
Absolutely.
There was I remember a guy telling me this, and I thought he was joking because I was younger. And this was talking about Jefferson. And Jefferson in 1986 won state. And they've always been a really solid program. But that in that little 3-year stretch, they were really, really good. And I can remember a guy, one of the county commissioners did a study, and more bank loans in that town were approved on the Mondays after win than any other time of the year. And it's funny, but I mean, that's the kind of stuff that happens when you have that community pride. And I know we're in an era now where people, and I sometimes get cynical too, but sports is the one thing, and especially football in Texas, it's the one thing that still can bring out the whole community, no matter what side of the political fence, the socioeconomic fence. You all meet at the fence on a small town to watch your team play and win.
Yep. Good point. Hey, where are you headed? Where are y'all headed this week?
All the way up to Bushland. We went as far east as you could go last week. This week we're going to go as far west into the Panhandle. We want to see Bushland Canadian. Canadian replacing a lot from a team. I feel like we say this every 3 years with Canadian. A special team that won a lot of games. Bushland replacing one of the best quarterbacks that's ever played in 3A. It's kind of a good measuring stick game for both of them before they get into their district schedules and such.
So will y'all leave out on Friday morning, or what's y'all's schedule? Do you base your road trip on where you're going to stop and eat? Like where you're going to have lunch, where you're going to eat dinner?
Yeah. Well, we admit that 100%.
That's how I do my road trips.
We have a couple places that we try to hit every year because of that. Now, it's a little different. I do this full time. Grant does not. He works a full-time job, and he doesn't have every Friday fully off. So oddly enough, we picked the 5.5-hour road trip on a half day, but we still will have time to go eat at our favorite Mexican food place in West Texas called The Plaza. And if anybody knows, they're all over. They're in Childress or Amarillo. They're in Borger. They're in a couple other places. They do stacked enchiladas. And if you've never had stacked enchiladas, it's a West Texas thing. Mm-hmm. If you've never had stacked enchiladas, my God, you're in heaven. And the temperatures are so good, we'll be able to maybe take a nap in the car at halftime. We have done that before after eating a place like that. But yeah, usually my favorite trips are like last week. We can get up and, we take our time getting there. This week, we're going to have to kind of rush. And we're going to have to rush Saturday because we both want to be back at it on our couches to watch Texas and Michigan. And they kick off at 11.
That's 11, yeah.
So we've got I've already called the hotel that we booked and said we need a 4:30 in the morning wake up call because we're gonna get up. The stupid things we do for football, man.
Hey, let me ask you a question. So my son, who is a senior at Tech, his roommate the first couple of years, his family, they coached at Littlefield. So his dad was a defensive coordinator. So he's coaching at Littlefield now. And there are Mexican restaurants around those areas. They've got some kind of red seasoned salt on the table. Does this place have the red? He tells me about it, but it's some kind of reddish chili powder seasoned salt that you put on your chips.
I've had one place in that used to be a bigger thing in East Texas. Papacitas in Longview used to do that, and then it kind of disappeared. I've spent some time out in New Mexico, and they do that a lot. So that might be a New Mexico thing. Okay. It's great, dude. If you've never had them, it's really dude.
He'll send me pictures of it. So shout out to Blake Green, coaching staff at Littlefield. He's supposed to bring me some of that stuff. He's come down here a couple of times.
They had a big win against La Mesa, I think it was last week.
Yeah. They, his brother is the quarterback. Chip Green is the quarterback there. I think he's a 4-year starter. So Blake's a good kid, and I always root for Littlefield. Last year, kind of had a collapse there at the end of the year. It got ugly there for a while.
I was just trying to. That's so weird that we were just talking about that. That they lost their first game and they won like 7 in a row. We actually talked about them for one of the first times in a long time. They were playing Abernathy, and Abernathy just blew the doors off of them. It was so shocking because Littlefield had one of the highest scoring offenses in 3A going into that game. And then, you see it all the time. They then hit that tumble, and then they ended up playing Canadian in round 1. So instead of playing a team that wasn't as good in round 1, they collapsed at the end and got their doors beat off by Canadian. I totally forgot about that.
All right, man. Anything else?
Now that's it. Hey, check out our state shows for 4A, 3A, and 2A. Of course, we do this Central Texas football podcast every week. Also, I haven't posted it yet, but I will by tomorrow morning. You're doing the Whitney coaches show. Hey, let me ask you before we close, what did Coach Haynes have to say about that Mart game? Was he surprised?
Yeah, well, I think he was worried about, didn't want the kids to be intimidated because like I said, they put them in a locker room with all the trophies.
Yeah.
You got all the state trophies. They're young, 10 sophomores. He was really impressed with how some of those kids stepped up. His leadership and he's got a quarterback this is his third year starting with Mason Seeley. Tay, he was really happy with the way those kids played, but he was more impressed on how his defense played and how those young kids came together.
That's the biggest thing. I thought, I said last week I thought Whitney would win, but I thought it would be more of the 42-35, that type, to go out there and just completely shut down a really good quarterback in Medlock who has a ton of experience. And we're talking as big of a game as you can play experience. And he ran the ball well, but man, they could not move the ball down the field. They couldn't get past. They were trying to go over the top on Whitney, and they couldn't do it. And that's, to me, again, the most impressive thing about that for Whitney.
Well, you look, I watched a little bit on NFHS. First play of the game, Medlock took it 52 yards to get inside the 10, and then Whitney holds them for, they go for it on fourth down. And after that first run, I was like, well, here we go. The defense is behind the offense because I didn't going into the season. I thought the offense was going to be fine. You brought back your running back, your quarterback. You got two kids at receiver that have offers that they're going to be really good, and you got some dudes that probably don't know their name, but they're really good athletes and they're really good players. So I was kind of like Coach, really, really happy and surprised I don't know if Coach is surprised, but really happy with the way the defense played.
What are your thoughts on them and Benbrook this week?
I think they win. Benbrook barely beat a Castleberry team that's another 4A D2 team that, historically not very good.
Yeah.
I think they throw a lot of wide receiver screens. It looks like their wide receivers block well on that play, but I think they played them, and Coach Haynes said they played them in 7-on-7 and beat them to clinch a state berth at the 7-on-7 tournament. So they've got some athletes. They kind of know them. Got a pretty good quarterback. Got some athletes. So I think it'll be a good game. But I think Whitney probably pulls away late and 20-30 point game. My guess.
I'm just curious to see how they come off that Mart game. Kids aren't dumb, and you can show them Mart, and you're going to be wow.
Yeah.
And then you're going to show them Benbrook, and they're going to be, okay, yeah, sure. And sometimes that gets into heads of kids and some even coaches. So I'm always big, and I think you kind of let's talk about Tech. It's not the big win only stays a big win if you win the next week. If you lose the next week, well, then that big win kind of go, okay, well, that that was a decent win. I just want to see how they bounce back. Also, I have always loved Benbrook's look. We need more green and yellow teams. That's what we grew up with. You're old like me. Back then, it seemed like every other team was green and yellow or maroon.
The Boyd Yellow Jackets. I grew up watching them with Robbie Cartwright at quarterback, won a state championship.
Wow, that's a name. But yeah,
I hung out with him in Lubbock for a little bit. He's a good dude, man. I liked Robbie.
Oh, that's what happened to him in life. He was hanging out with you. But no, I think Whitney wins comfortably. But I do think Benbrook with that offense can make it a bit of a battle in that first half. They do have a legitimately really solid offense with a lot of people coming back on that team.
Yeah, and that was probably a question I should ask Coach. How do you get these guys back down to ground zero, get their head right? Hey, that was a good win, but let's leave it in Mart and let's get back to Whitney and go to work, and not ride that.
Yeah, that's a good point.
Hey, man, I appreciate it as always. Thanks for doing this with us. Thank you, L4 Media. Thank you, Ranch Masters, for our sponsor. It was a good one.
All right, man. We'll see y'all next week.